She tied a crimson thread around her wrist, whispering a wish for love into the midnight air, never imagining that on the other end of that thread waited a billionaire whose lips would soon rewrite her fate. Have you ever tried something simple, almost foolish, only to realize destiny had been listening all along? Now, let's dive back into the story. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you love stories that touch the heart and keep you thinking long after they end, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from. I've got another powerful story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let's begin. The thread was thin, fragile, but she believed in its quiet power. In her small, cluttered apartment, the hum of the city below felt distant, almost unreal, as if the world had paused just to hear her wish. She didn't expect magic. She expected hope, a small flickering ember in the corner of a life that had begun to feel too ordinary, too lonely. Maya stared at the thread, running her fingers over its smooth surface, thinking about how she had arrived at this peculiar ritual. Friends had laughed when she told them about it. A red thread, they had scoffed, sipping coffee and scrolling on their phones. That's childish. But Maya had laughed too, even as a shiver of anticipation ran through her. It wasn't about superstition. It was about believing in possibility, in daring to hope for something beyond the routine of her 9-to-5 existence. Her apartment smelled faintly of tea and old books. Piles of documents and half-finished sketches cluttered the desk by the window, a quiet testament to the life she had built for herself, careful, controlled, and meticulously ordinary. Outside, the city lights shimmered on rain-slick streets, casting fractured reflections across the glass. Maya had often walked those streets alone, her heels tapping a rhythm of solitude, feeling the pulse of lives entwined yet separate from her own. Tonight, she felt like she had finally paused long enough to notice that pulse, to reach for it in a way she hadn't dared before. Meanwhile, across the city, in a towering glass office that seemed to scrape the clouds themselves, Julian Hart's world was a study in precision and power. The billionaire CEO rarely paused, rarely hesitated, and certainly never imagined a thin red thread could alter the course of his carefully ordered life. But tonight, something tugged at him, a sense of anticipation he couldn't name. He sat behind an imposing desk, reviewing contracts with meticulous attention, yet his mind wandered. There was a faint unease in his chest, a hollow feeling he couldn't fill with acquisitions, mergers, or lavish dinners. He had everything, and yet, as he adjusted his cufflinks and stared at the city below, he felt the absence of something that words couldn't capture. Back in her apartment, Maya's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. A message from her best friend appeared. "Are you really doing this? The thread?" She smiled, typing back quickly. "I have to. Just watch." It felt absurd typing that. Watching what? She didn't know, but there was a thrill in the unknown, a flutter of possibility that she hadn't felt in years. Her heart, usually so careful, so guarded, beat a little faster. Maya leaned back against the balcony railing, letting the cool night air brush against her skin. She looked up at the sky, at the faint scatter of stars trying to pierce through the glow of the city. "If you're out there," she whispered to whatever fate might be listening, "I hope you feel this thread too." She held the end of the thread tight, feeling the pressure of its simple connection, and then let it fall loosely over her wrist, a tiny tether to the unknown. Inside Julian Hart's office, his assistant had left him alone for the evening, leaving the hum of the city and the low whir of the air conditioning as the only company. He rubbed his temples and leaned back in his chair, staring at the reflection of his own face in the darkened glass. "Why now?" he muttered under his breath. He didn't know why, but there was an invisible weight pressing at the edges of his focus. He felt compelled to move, to act, though he couldn't name the impulse. Somewhere, deep inside him, a thread had begun to pull. Hours passed, unnoticed, as Maya curled up on the balcony with a blanket around her shoulders. The thread rested lightly against her wrist, and though it was fragile, it felt as though it vibrated with intention. She didn't notice the slow smile that formed on her lips, the way her eyes reflected the city lights. She imagined the person at the other end, someone extraordinary, someone she would never expect, someone whose life was as structured and unyielding as her own had been. And then, just as sleep began to tug in her, she felt a strange warmth pulse from her wrist, almost like the thread had a heartbeat. Across town, Julian Hart's night had grown equally restless. A minor oversight in a meeting, a client's last-minute cancellation, left him staring blankly at his desk. His mind drifted to something he couldn't explain, a sensation of being called, of being tethered to something unseen. He shook his head, annoyed at himself for indulging the feeling, and yet he felt drawn, inexplicably, as if invisible forces were beginning to weave around him, guiding him towards an event he couldn't yet see. The night deepened, and Maya finally climbed into bed, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, eyes heavy but mind alive with anticipation. She thought about the thread, about the ritual, and the almost childish thrill of believing in something magical. Somewhere out there, a life waited to collide with hers. Somewhere, a man with a heart just as restless as hers was tonight would be caught by an invisible pull, leading them, to a moment that would change everything. As she drifted toward sleep, the red thread caught in the lamplight, its faint sheen like a promise shimmering in the darkness. A single thought flitted through her mind. What if this works? What if this small act of faith, this simple ritual, could connect her to someone who would alter the course of her life forever? And somewhere across the city, Julian Hart, oblivious to the thread or its significance, sighed and leaned back in his chair. The hum of the city filled the silence, a prelude to a night that would bring two lives inexorably closer, the invisible red thread already beginning its work. The city slept, unaware of the fragile tether forming between two hearts, and in the quietest moments, when hope and longing met, destiny began to stir. Maya woke the next morning to the golden spill of sunlight through her curtains. The thread, still snug around her wrist, seemed almost heavier now, as if it carried the weight of possibility. She rolled over, heart racing with an unfamiliar anticipation, her mind replaying the faint pulse she had felt the night before. It was impossible, she told herself. A thread couldn't do anything, and yet the flutter of expectation in her chest refused to quiet down. Across the city, Julian Hart strode through the marble lobby of his office tower, briefcase in hand. Meetings blurred into one another, each presentation rehearsed, each handshake precise. But his thoughts kept drifting back to an inexplicable sensation, a tug, an invisible pull he couldn't ignore. He caught his reflection in the elevator doors, a familiar, sharp-edged face staring back at him. "Focus," he muttered, shaking the thought away. Yet as he stepped into the bustling street, a sudden unease gripped him, a shiver that ran along his spine and refused to vanish. Maya's morning commute was a predictable rhythm. Bus to train, train to office. She clutched her bag and the coffee she didn't need, eyes scanning the crowd, heart oddly alert to every passing face. The city seemed larger somehow, every movement amplified, every stranger a potential ripple in her day. She smiled faintly to herself, remembering the thread, imagining the impossible, that someone, somewhere, might be feeling the same quiet pull. As fate, or coincidence, would have it, Julian had chosen the same train that morning. He boarded, tall and commanding, briefcase in hand, the scent of leather and cedar lingering as he moved to the center car. Maya stepped into the same car, shoulders tense from the chill, and their eyes met for the briefest moment. Something in that look, the curve of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes, made her pause mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. Julian's own gaze lingered a fraction too long, a spark of recognition he couldn't place flickering across his features. They didn't speak. Not yet. Words would have ruined the moment. The hum of the train was a fragile soundtrack, the subtle rhythm of motion making the air between them electric. Maya's fingers tightened around the thread on her wrist, half expecting it to pulse again,
to remind her that this was not mere chance. Julian adjusted his coat, a fleeting look of surprise crossing his expression, as if the universe had just whispered a secret he wasn't ready to understand. The train jolted into the next station, doors opening to a flood of passengers. Maya felt herself swept along, jostled, but Julian moved instinctively, subtly adjusting his stance to shield her from the press of the crowd. It was a small, almost unconscious act, but it sent a ripple through her chest, a tiny acknowledgement that perhaps this thread, this invisible pull, was real. Their paths diverged when they stepped onto the platform. Julian disappeared into the sea of suits and umbrellas, leaving Maya clutching her bag and the coffee she didn't need, feeling the absence of his presence like a vacuum. And yet the thread, unseen but tangible in her heart, seemed to quiver with promise, a subtle reminder that their meeting had only begun. At her office, Maya couldn't focus. Every notification, every email felt muted, irrelevant. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the man on the train, the way his gaze had lingered just long enough to unsettle her. She told herself it was nothing, a fleeting crush, born of coincidence. But the pull in her chest, a strange mix of curiosity and longing, refused to be ignored. Meanwhile, Julian arrived at his office, shaking off the odd sense of vulnerability the encounter had sparked. He prided himself on control, on precision. Yet today the memory of a single moment, the brush of a stranger's hand, the intensity in her eyes, refused to fade. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing at the city skyline, and allowed himself the smallest acknowledgement. He was unsettled, and he didn't know why. The day unfolded in parallel, Maya navigating her office tasks with distracted focus, Julian buried in negotiations, yet haunted by the memory of her. Both felt the tug of an unseen force, a thread weaving its quiet way through their lives. The world carried on around them, unaware that it had already begun to stitch their fates together. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the city in shades of amber and rose, Maya left the office for the evening, her mind restless. She wandered through a quiet street near a small park, pulling her coat tighter around her. She had no plan, no expectation, only the strange, inexplicable feeling that her life was on the cusp of something extraordinary. Julian, leaving a late meeting, walked briskly along a parallel route, unaware that their paths were converging again. The city had a peculiar way of bending the improbable into reality, of moving strangers closer without their knowing. And tonight, the thread, delicate but unbroken, hummed with the promise of connection. Maya paused beneath a lamppost, staring at the glow illuminating the wet pavement. She felt the thread pulse softly against her wrist, a whisper of destiny that sent a shiver down her spine. Somewhere close, Julian felt it too, a pull he could not rationalize. The city around them blurred, and for a fleeting moment, the impossible seemed real. The red thread, their invisible connection, had begun to tighten. And with that, the stage was set. Two lives, separate yet inexplicably intertwined, were moving toward the first collision that would set their story ablaze. The thread, fragile but unyielding, had already begun its work.
Maya sat at her desk the next morning, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, but the warmth did little to calm the storm in her chest. The memory of Julian's gaze lingered, unbidden and persistent, each flash of his eyes tugging at something she didn't fully understand. She shook her head, scolding herself. "It's just a man," she whispered. "You barely know him." But the pulse of anticipation, the quiet hum of that red thread around her wrist, refused to be ignored. Across the city, Julian Hart's office hummed with activity, yet his mind wandered, despite the calls, contracts, and figures sprawled across his desk. That single, brief encounter on the train had lodged itself deep in his thoughts, refusing to leave. He prided himself on logic, control, predictability.
But today he was neither logical nor predictable. The thought of her lingered like a persistent shadow, gnawing at the edges of his composure. Maya's best friend, Clara, called during a mid-morning break. "You're daydreaming again," Clara teased. "Who was he this time? Another stranger on your commute?" Maya bit her lip, trying not to smile. I don't know," she admitted. "It's just something about him felt different." Clara laughed lightly. "Maya, come on. You're letting yourself get carried away. You don't even know his name. Don't get caught in a fantasy." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the thread's subtle pull against her wrist. Is it really just a fantasy, she wondered? The rational part of her brain said yes. Logic dictated that this was nothing more than a fleeting spark of attraction. But the thread hummed quietly, insistent, almost alive. It told her that this was only the beginning, even if her mind refused to acknowledge it. Meanwhile, Julian's assistant knocked softly on his office door. "Sir, lunch is ready in the boardroom, and you have another call scheduled with the London office." Julian nodded, eyes unfocused. "Thank you," he murmured. But even as he ate, even as he signed off on agreements and delegated tasks, Julian found himself resisting a strange urge. The urge to search, to seek, to find the woman whose gaze had unsettled him so completely. He pushed it away. "I have no time for this," he told himself. "I can't let a fleeting encounter disrupt everything I've built." That evening, Maya walked home slowly, the thread's tug stronger than ever. Every passing stranger made her glance reflexively, every shadow and reflection feeding her restless imagination. She felt a strange blend of hope and apprehension, like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap or retreat. Her mind supplied 1,000 reasons why she should ignore it. He was a stranger. Their meeting had been brief, almost accidental, yet the thread, delicate and invisible, seemed to pull her forward, whispering that she could not walk away so easily. Julian, meanwhile, attended a high-profile charity gala, the city skyline glittering behind him as he moved among guests with practiced charm. Every handshake, every polite laugh felt hollow, like going through the motions of a life that had become all structure and no surprise. And then, in a moment that made his pulse quicken, he caught sight of her. Or rather, the hint of her. Maya's familiar silhouette near the edge of the ballroom, hair glinting in the soft chandelier light, the thread of red still faintly visible at her wrist. He froze, awareness sharpening every sense. The room blurred, music and chatter fading into the background. It can't be, he thought, disbelief clawing at his rational mind. What are the odds? Maya didn't notice him at first, busy navigating through the crowd towards an exit, and yet, even as she walked, her wrist tingled with the thread's subtle insistence. She paused, glancing around, as if sensing a presence. Her breath caught slightly, and she shook her head. "It's nothing, just my imagination." But Julian had moved closer, hesitant yet drawn. Every instinct screamed at him to approach, to speak, to bridge the invisible gap between them. And yet fear rooted him in place. He had built walls around his life, careful ones, and this unexpected pull threatened to unravel them. He told himself to wait, to observe, to remain in control. Resistance, he decided, was safer than surrender.
Outside, Maya finally reached the quiet street that led home, her pace quickening as the thread's pull grew more insistent. She imagined Julian, the man from the train, but reality whispered caution. What if I'm wrong? What if it's just coincidence? Her rational mind clashed with the thread's quiet insistence, a tug of war she had never felt before. Julian finally stepped outside Begala, pausing at the curb, as if sensing something in the night air. The city seemed to hush around him. the lights dimming just enough for a moment of stillness. "It's him," he thought, almost without thinking. His pulse raced, his chest tight with a tension he couldn't explain. And yet doubt, an old familiar companion, urged him to turn back, to retreat into the safety of what he knew. Have you ever felt drawn to someone you barely know, and yet your mind screamed, "Don't"? Comment below, would you follow your heart or your head? Maya rounded the corner, slowing as she noticed the shadows shift near the street lamp. Julian stepped out of the darkened alleyway, eyes locking with hers across the quiet street. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the ordinary city evening transforming into something charged with possibility. Both felt the thread's invisible tug, stronger now, more insistent, yet neither moved. Fear, pride, and doubt kept them frozen. For Maya, it was the fear of disappointment, the worry that hope would crash against reality. For Julian, it was the need for control, the fear that surrendering to this unknown force would unravel the carefully constructed life he had built. And yet, beneath the resistance, both felt a pulse of longing, a recognition that something had shifted irreversibly. They lingered for a heartbeat, worlds apart, yet connected by the unseen thread. Neither spoke, neither moved. The tension hung between them, palpable and suffocating, a quiet promise of the storm to come. Finally, the city noise returned, the spell of the moment broken, and both reluctantly stepped away, retreating into their respective worlds. The thread pulsed faintly, a quiet reminder that resistance could not last forever. Their paths had crossed again, but the real challenge had only begun, overcoming fear, doubt, and the walls they had built around their hearts. Maya's thoughts kept drifting back to the man on the train, the way his gaze had lingered just long enough to unsettle her. She told herself it was nothing, a fleeting crush born of coincidence, but the pull in her chest, a strange mix of curiosity and longing, refused to be ignored. Do you think destiny will pull them together, or will fear keep them apart? Comment your prediction before the next part unfolds. And so, the first true resistance had begun. Maya and Julian had felt the spark, the pull, the promise of connection, and yet both recoiled, caught between desire and caution. The red thread hummed in quiet persistence, promising that the inevitable collision of hearts was only a matter of time.
The rain started without warning, a sudden downpour that turned the city streets into a blur of reflective lights and rushing umbrellas. Maya tightened her coat around her, tugging her bag closer to her side, but it was useless against the relentless spray. She cursed under her breath, realizing she had left her umbrella at the office, and quickened her pace, hoping to reach the nearby cafe she often used as a refuge. Julian Hart, stepping out of his car after a late meeting, had also been caught in the storm. He pulled his coat tighter, the wind tugging at his tie, and scanned the street for a cab. The city was a river of umbrellas and hurried feet. But then he saw her, Maya, hurrying down the same sidewalk, drenched and struggling with her bag. Their eyes met immediately. No thread, no coincidence, just recognition. Maya's pulse quickened, and Julian felt the familiar tug in his chest, a mix of curiosity, desire, and something deeper he refused to name. He moved toward her instinctively, as if some invisible force had guided his steps. A gust of wind sent her umbrella flying from another pedestrian, knocking over a trash can and scattering papers across the sidewalk. Maya groaned and bent to retrieve them, but the rain soaked her sleeves in seconds.
Julian reached her side before she could protest. "Here," he said, holding out a thick, dry coat and a spare umbrella from his car. His tone was casual, authoritative, yet beneath it there was a strange warmth that made Maya pause. I thank you," she stammered, cheeks flushing as she accepted the umbrella. The rain dripped from her hair and coat, soaking her already damp clothes. Julian moved to shield her with the umbrella, their proximity unavoidable. The space between them shrank to inches, and Maya could feel the subtle heat radiating from him. Neither spoke for a moment, both aware that this was no ordinary encounter. The city around them seemed to fade. The splatter of rain, the blur of headlights, the hurried crowds, all irrelevant. It was just the two of them, bound together in this small, soaked cocoon. "I don't usually do this," Maya admitted finally, her voice small, almost drowned by the rain. "But thank you for helping." Julian's lips quirked into a half-smile, the kind that suggested both amusement and something unspoken. "Neither do I," he replied. "But sometimes circumstances force the best intentions." The phrase hung in the air, and Maya felt it echo in her chest. "Circumstances," she repeated softly, almost to herself, realizing how true it was. This encounter, the rain, the coat, the umbrella, had forced them into proximity they would otherwise have avoided. And yet there was comfort here, too, a fragile safety she had not expected. Julian tilted his head slightly, observing her with quiet intensity. "Are you heading somewhere, or just walking in the rain?" Maya shrugged, a faint laugh escaping her despite the cold and wet. "Trying to get to a cafe before I turn into a puddle," she said. She gestured to the small shop down the street. "It's only a few blocks." "I'll walk with you," Julian said, falling into step beside her. There was no question, no hesitation. The thread, unseen, unspoken, pulled them together, and neither resisted now. The sound of their steps splashing through puddles, the rhythm of their movement, created a strange intimacy, a shared rhythm neither had expected. They entered the cafe dripping wet and shaking off the rain, drawing a few curious glances from the patrons. Maya found a table by the window, trying to regain some composure, and Julian took the seat opposite her without asking, his presence filling the space in a way that was both comforting and electrifying.
The waitress approached with menus, but neither really looked at them. Instead, there was a silence, charged and awkward, that neither wanted to break. Finally, Maya cleared her throat. "So, do we know each other?" she asked, half joking, half serious, aware that the absurdity of the situation made her heart race. Julian's smile softened, and he shook his head. "Not yet," he said, "but perhaps we're supposed to." The words sent a shiver through Maya, and she found herself meeting his gaze longer than necessary. There was an intensity there, not just curiosity, but something deeper, a thread of connection she could feel as tangibly as the wet fabric clinging to her skin. Have you ever been forced into a situation with someone that changed how you felt about them instantly? Comment below. What would you do in Maya's shoes? They spoke cautiously at first, exchanging small talk about the rain, the city, the cafe. But gradually, the conversation deepened. Maya mentioned her work, her favorite little rituals, the thread, without revealing too much. Julian listened with genuine attention, asking questions, teasing lightly, making her laugh despite the damp chill that clung to her. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours, time bending around them. Both sensed the unspoken, the thread's invisible pull, the connection neither fully understood, the tension that crackled quietly between proximity and restraint. Maya felt herself drawn to him, but fear lingered at the edges, fear of wanting too much, too soon,
fear of letting someone so powerful into her delicate, controlled life. Julian, too, was conflicted. His world had always been structured, predictable, untouchable. Yet here, beside her, sharing laughs over spilled sugar packets and rain-soaked coats, he felt the vulnerability he had long buried. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to resist it. The rain had slowed outside, but neither moved to leave. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a dry handkerchief, offering it to Maya. "For your hair," he said softly. The simple act, mundane in any other context, felt monumental. Maya's fingers brushed his, and for a heartbeat, the threads seemed to pulse with their combined energy, an invisible reminder that proximity was only the beginning. Eventually, they had to leave. The storm had passed, but the electricity in the air remained. Julian offered to walk her to her building, and Maya accepted, realizing that the thread, and whatever it represented, was no longer subtle. It was a force. It was undeniable. Outside, the city was wet and glimmering, the night alive with reflections and neon lights. They walked in silence, neither needing to speak, the unspoken connection stronger than words. Maya felt a mix of exhilaration and terror. Exhilaration at the closeness, terror at how much she wanted to reach for it. Julian felt the same, the pull of something unexpected, something transformative, something he could no longer ignore. Do you think their proximity tonight will finally break down their resistance, or will fear hold them back? Comment your prediction before the next scene. As Maya entered her building, Julian lingered at the corner, watching her disappear inside. The thread, invisible yet insistent, hummed softly between them. Forced proximity had changed everything. The walls around their hearts had started to crack. And though neither would admit it yet, the pull of destiny and each other was now undeniable.
Maya returned to her apartment that night, her wet coat dripping onto the floor, but she barely noticed. She sank into her favorite chair, tracing the red thread around her wrist, feeling its subtle hum like a heartbeat against her skin. Her mind replayed the day. Julian's steady presence, the warmth of his coat, the quiet strength in his gaze. She couldn't understand why, but the memory made her chest ache with a strange, sweet tension. And yet, underneath the thrill, a familiar fear began to creep in. Maya pressed a hand against her temple, closing her eyes. She had always been careful, always measured. The world had taught her that vulnerability carried consequences, that trusting too easily meant risking heartbreak. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let anyone control your heart, Maya. Guard it fiercely." Her fingers brushed the thread, and she whispered to herself, almost involuntarily, "Maybe I'm ready to try." But even as she said it, a shadow of doubt lingered. Could she truly let herself believe in someone she had met by chance? Could she risk opening her heart to a man whose life was so different from hers? Meanwhile, Julian Hart sat in his penthouse office, the city skyline twinkling beneath him like distant stars. He stared at the reflection of the red thread on her wrist. He could picture it perfectly, even though he hadn't actually seen it. Something about her had lodged itself into his memory, impossible to erase. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head, and allowed himself to remember. Julian's past had not been kind. He had grown up under the weight of expectation, a childhood structured by wealth, power, and the absence of tenderness. His father had been distant, his mother a ghost of elegance and judgment, leaving him to navigate life with a calculated, guarded heart. Affection had always been transactional, loyalty conditional, and trust a luxury he could not afford. He had built walls so high that few could see the man beneath them. Maya, on the other hand, had known love and loss in quieter, more subtle ways. Her parents had divorced when she was 10, leaving her with a deep-seated fear of abandonment. She had learned to rely on herself, to protect her heart, and yet to crave connection in secret. Her friends often joked about her careful optimism, the way she approached relationships with a cautious hope. She had fallen before, hard, and the scars still tingled when she remembered. As the evening deepened, Maya pulled out her sketchbook, letting her emotions spill across the pages in jagged, chaotic lines. The thread pulsed against her wrist, and she couldn't ignore the parallel between its pull and the tug she felt toward Julian. The memory of his hand offering the coat, the shared umbrella, the warmth of his presence, it all felt unreal, like a dream she feared waking from. Julian, at the same time, poured himself a drink, staring into the amber liquid as if it might contain answers. He had never been a man prone to magic or fate, yet he could not deny the pull, the invisible tether that seemed to guide him toward her. He thought of her laughter in the cafe, the way she had leaned into the umbrella without hesitation, the vulnerability she had allowed in those moments. For a man accustomed to control, this was disarming, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. Later that night, a memory of Maya's own past surfaced. She remembered her first crush, a boy in middle school who had moved away before she could confess her feelings. She remembered the sting of rejection, the whispered words that had haunted her for years. "You're too much." The thread pulsed against her wrist, almost as if urging her to try again, to allow herself to feel, to hope, despite the old wounds. Julian, meanwhile, remembered his first heartbreak, the one he had never shared with anyone. A woman he had trusted implicitly had betrayed him, leaving a wound not easily healed. That pain had shaped him, had fortified the walls he'd built, and had taught him to avoid vulnerability at all costs. Yet in the briefest moments with Maya, the walls trembled, the lessons of the past clashing with a magnetic pull of something wholly unexpected. The next morning, Maya awoke early, the thread still warm around her wrist. She felt the urge to act, to embrace possibility despite fear, but hesitation held her back. She poured coffee, stared at the city outside her window, and whispered, "I'm scared, but I want to try." Julian, too, began his day with the memory of Maya, lingering like a ghost he could not dismiss. He reviewed schedules and contracts mechanically, yet his mind strayed to her, her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she had looked at him without fear. He realized that despite years of calculated living, despite every lesson his past had taught him, he could not ignore her. Both of them felt the same tension, the pull of desire against the resistance of fear, the invisible tether linking them despite circumstances, despite logic. And it was that tension that would soon force them together again in ways neither could anticipate. Have you ever let a past wound stop you from taking a chance on someone? Comment below. What would you do if you were Maya or Julian? As the day progressed, Maya received a message from a friend suggesting an art exhibit opening near her apartment. She hesitated, debating whether to go. The thread pulsed, faint but insistent, and she realized her heart wanted her to step forward. Julian, independently, noticed an invite to the same exhibit through a business connection, and without thinking, decided to attend. The parallel plans were unspoken, unseen, yet they hinted at the inevitability of their paths crossing again. Both carried their pasts like invisible weights, yet both were being drawn toward the same future. The city, the red thread, and their intertwined fates had begun orchestrating a meeting neither could resist for long. By the evening, the thread seemed almost alive, a quiet pulse of fate threading through the city streets, through their thoughts, through every beat of their hearts. Maya dressed carefully for the exhibit, choosing colors that felt warm and inviting, unaware that Julian would soon step into the same room. Each carried vulnerability and longing, but also the knowledge, instinctive and undeniable, that their connection was growing stronger. What secret part of their past will come out first when they meet again? Comment your guess before the next scene. And so the stage was set. Secrets, scars, and stories hidden for years had emerged to shape the way Maya and Julian would meet next. The thread pulsed insistently, weaving them closer, hinting at the intimacy and emotional reckoning that was about to unfold. Their journey toward love, despite fear and past wounds, had entered a critical phase.
The gallery was bathed in soft, golden light, the kind that made the colors of the paintings shimmer and the shadows curl just so. Maya moved slowly, her fingers brushing along the frames as though touching the edges of other lives. She had never felt particularly drawn to art before, but tonight the pull was undeniable, an excuse to step out of her routine, to let herself feel something different. Julian arrived quietly, stepping past the velvet rope into the same room. He paused at the entrance, scanning the crowd, until his eyes found her. She was standing near a large canvas, a swirl of blues and golds, completely absorbed. The thread, still invisible yet potent, vibrated faintly around their wrists, like a heartbeat echoing across the distance. Maya felt it first, a subtle awareness that someone was near. And when she turned, she met Julian's gaze. Neither of them smiled immediately. It was unnecessary. The recognition, the shared history of tension and near encounters was enough. Their first words weren't urgent. They were gentle, curious, exploratory. "You're here," Maya said softly, a note of wonder in her voice. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Julian inclined his head slightly, his expression softening. "I didn't plan on it, but some things feel unavoidable." He gestured subtly to the painting in front of them. "Sometimes a painting draws you in without explanation. Maybe sometimes people do the same." Maya's lips curved into a small smile, and for the first time in a long while, she laughed. Light, unguarded, letting the sound escape freely. Julian felt it, as if it touched something deep inside him, something he had long tried to ignore. It was startling, addictive, and achingly human. They walked slowly through the gallery, the thread tugging them together with every step. Conversation came easily now, layered with subtext, laughter, and glances that lingered a beat too long. Maya shared anecdotes from her childhood, the little quirks of her life, the small failures and triumphs she rarely revealed. Julian listened intently, offering only the occasional story from his own past, carefully measured, yet revealing enough to draw her closer. There was a pause near a painting of two figures walking along a stormy shore. Maya traced the lines with her eyes. "It's raw," she said, "the kind of emotion you can almost feel in your chest." Julian nodded, watching her more than the painting. "It's honest," he said, "and sometimes that honesty scares people." He hesitated, then added softly, "Does it scare you?" Maya looked at him, startled by the directness, but then nodded slowly. "Yes. But maybe it's also what I need." Julian felt a shift, a subtle crack in the armor he had worn so carefully. He leaned slightly closer, though still respectful, and said, "I think we're both afraid, but afraid of the same thing, letting someone in." Their hands brushed lightly as they moved toward another painting, and the touch was electric. Maya's pulse quickened, and Julian felt an unfamiliar heat in his chest. Neither recoiled, neither pulled away. It was a silent acknowledgement that the connection, the red thread, the inexplicable pull, was stronger than fear. Julian, taking a risk he hadn't allowed himself in years, asked, "Maya, may I be honest with you?" "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. He exhaled slowly. "I don't usually connect with people like this, but with you it feels different. Unsettling, yes, but in a way that makes me want to understand it, understand you." Maya's eyes softened. She admitted, "I've been resisting it, trying to be careful, but I can't." There's something about you, something I can't ignore." Julian smiled, small and genuine, the kind of smile reserved for rare, private moments. He extended his hand subtly, not as a formality, but as an offer. Maya accepted, and this time they didn't let go too quickly. Their fingers intertwined, hesitant at first, then with quiet confidence. The thread hummed faintly against both wrists, imperceptible to anyone else, but powerful enough to feel like a lifeline. They walked toward the final room of the gallery. The quiet intimacy of shared space deepened with each step. Neither needed to speak. Their presence, their proximity, conveyed a new layer of understanding. Julian finally broke the silence. "It's strange," he murmured. "I usually analyze everything, calculate every outcome. But with you, it's impossible to do that. It's effortless." Maya's gaze met his. "Effortless isn't always easy," she said softly. "But maybe it's worth it." They lingered near the last painting, a sunset over a calm lake, the sky ablaze with color. The world outside felt distant, unimportant. The thread hummed quietly, a reminder that they were bound together, not just by chance, but by intention, curiosity, and a shared willingness to step past fear. As the evening drew to a close, Julian walked Maya to the exit. The rain from the previous night had left the streets gleaming, reflections of neon and streetlights painting the pavement. Neither spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, they savored the subtle closeness, the warmth of shared presence. At her door, Maya hesitated, her hand brushing the thread on her wrist. "Thank you. For tonight," she said softly. Julian's gaze softened, deep and steady. "No," he replied. "Thank you for letting me in." They parted reluctantly, knowing that their connection had grown stronger tonight, their walls cracking under the weight of shared vulnerability. The thread pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, reminding them both that this was only the beginning. And so the first real emotional bond was formed. Maya and Julian had shared vulnerability, laughter, and presence. The red thread hummed between them, a quiet promise of love, intimacy, and the challenges that still awaited. Their connection had moved beyond mere curiosity. It had become something they both longed to explore, despite fear, despite past wounds.
The morning sunlight filtered weakly through Maya's apartment window, casting pale patterns across the floor. She moved mechanically, making tea, tidying the kitchen, trying to shake the unease that had settled in her chest overnight. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she reached for it, hoping for a message from Julian. But the text that appeared made her heart sink. It wasn't from him. It was a photo, sent anonymously. Julian, arms entwined with another woman, laughing in a private cafe she had never known existed. Maya stared at it, disbelief freezing her mid-step. Her mind raced, refusing to accept it. It can't be him. It's a mistake, or... She shook her head, the thread around her wrist pulsing faintly, as if protesting her doubt. Meanwhile, Julian sat in his office, unaware that the storm he would soon face had already begun. Earlier that day, a business partner had insisted he attend a high-stakes lunch with a potential client, bringing along his assistant's sister, a charming woman eager to make connections. The pictures Maya had received, taken out of context, were the result of casual gestures, laughter, and misinterpreted proximity. Yet from miles away, Maya saw only what she feared: betrayal. Her chest tightened, a familiar weight she had thought she had moved past, pressing down on her.
Memories of abandonment, rejection, and past heartbreak surfaced with brutal clarity. She felt anger, confusion, and an aching sense of loss. The same vulnerability she had opened up to with Julian the night before seemed like a dangerous, foolish mistake. Julian, unaware of the messages, called her mid-afternoon. "Maya," he said when she answered, his voice warm, soft, reaching for the intimacy they had built, but she could barely look at him, her voice brittle, sharp with pain. I can't," she whispered, cutting him off. "I saw the pictures. I know what this is about." "Wait, what pictures?" Julian asked, alarmed, the pulse in his chest quickening. "Don't lie to me, Julian. I saw you. You don't have to explain. I can't do this." Her words trembled, but she ended the call before he could speak, leaving him staring at the silent phone, confused, hurt, and furious at the misunderstanding. The thread pulsed faintly against her wrist, now a reminder of what she had allowed herself to feel, only to see it threatened by doubt. The betrayal she imagined cut deeper than any reality could. She buried herself in work, in errands, in anything that could distract from the ache. Yet the pull of the thread remained, faint but unyielding, a whisper of what she had nearly found. Julian tried to reach her all day, sending messages, emails, even a voicemail. But Maya resisted. Each attempt was a knife twisting in her chest, proof of the connection she both feared and desired. He couldn't force her to listen, couldn't explain the truth over a distance that now felt insurmountable. By evening, Julian decided he had to see her, to confront the misunderstanding in person. He arrived at her apartment, coat wet from the drizzle outside, but she didn't answer the door. He rang again and again, each chime of the bell echoing in the empty hallway, a painful counterpoint to the silence on the other side. Inside, Maya leaned against the door, heart pounding, mind torn. If I open it, I risk everything. If I don't, I lose him. The red threads seemed to hum now, louder, almost insistent, as if it knew that the choice before her was not just about Julian, it was about her own courage, her willingness to trust, her ability to let go of fear. Instead, she retreated to her bedroom, hiding from the world, from him, and even from herself. Tears slid down her cheeks, blurring the images of the thread and the memory of the gallery, the rain, the intimate conversations. She felt utterly alone, the emotional low point she had feared, now fully realized. Julian, outside the apartment, finally spoke aloud, frustration and vulnerability mingling. "Maya, please, just listen. It's not what you think. You have to trust me." But the words fell on empty space. He didn't know if she would ever hear them. The night stretched long and heavy. Maya stared at the thread, a cruel reminder of the connection that had seemed so promising only hours before. Julian walked the city streets, restless, trying to make sense of how quickly trust could be broken, how fragile the bond they had built could feel. Both were acutely aware of what was at stake, the first true vulnerability they had shared, now threatened by misunderstanding, distance, and fear. Have you ever misinterpreted someone's actions and let it push you away? Comment below. What would you do if you were Maya or Julian? The following day, Maya went through her routine, mechanical and muted, unable to focus. Every interaction reminded her of the thread, of Julian, of what she had risked and lost. The thought of seeing him, speaking to him, even receiving another message was both unbearable and irresistible. The emotional cost of misunderstanding had become painfully clear. Julian, equally conflicted, tried one final approach. He left a note at her door, brief but heartfelt. "Maya, nothing has changed. I would never betray what we have. Please let me explain. Julian." He didn't know if it would reach her, or if she would allow herself to read it, but it was all he could do to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Would you open the note or walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. By evening, Maya finally picked up the note, staring at Julian's handwriting with a mixture of longing and doubt. Her chest ached, torn between mistrust and desire. She folded the note carefully, holding it to her heart, but she didn't read it immediately. Instead, she sank into the couch, tears spilling again, the thread around her wrist pulsing quiet insistence, a reminder that their connection was far from over, even in this emotional low. Julian, watching the city lights from his penthouse, felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. Yet he refused to give up, the red thread humming in his imagination, a quiet promise that this bond, tested and strained, could survive. Do you think Maya will forgive Julian and let him explain? Or will fear keep them apart? Comment your prediction before the next scene. The first true test of their relationship had arrived. Misunderstanding, miscommunication, and fear threatened to undo all the vulnerability and connection they had built. The thread pulsed, persistent, a quiet promise that the next step, whether towards reconciliation or heartbreak, was inevitable.
The city was quiet that evening, a soft drizzle misting the streets and reflecting the glow of lampposts on the wet pavement. Maya sat by her window, Julian's note clutched in her hand, the words she hadn't dared to read burning in her mind. She knew she had a choice: let fear dominate, retreat into her carefully constructed walls, or allow herself to trust, to believe, to risk everything for the possibility of love. Her past whispered warnings: abandonment, betrayal, the sting of trusting and losing. Every scar tugged at her heart, urging her to protect it, to turn away from vulnerability. But beneath the fear, something stronger pulsed, the thread, warm and persistent against her wrist, reminding her of Julian, of the connection they had forged, and of the moments of joy and laughter they had shared. She exhaled slowly and opened the note. Julian's handwriting stretched across the page, simple yet profound. Maya, nothing has changed. I have never felt this connection before, nor do I intend to let fear or misunderstanding break it. Meet me. Let me explain. Let us not throw away what could be extraordinary. Her breath caught. The words were a lifeline, a call to courage. She hesitated, staring at the note, then folded it carefully, grabbing her coat and the small umbrella she had left by the door. For the first time in days, she felt clarity, a flicker of daring that urged her to act rather than retreat. Julian, meanwhile, had returned to the gallery where they had first truly bonded. He arrived early, pacing quietly, rehearsing what he would say, his hands gripping the railing along the balcony that overlooked the entrance. Each passing minute stretched into an eternity. The thread pulsed faintly around his wrist, a subtle reminder of Maya, of the bond he refused to relinquish, of the vulnerability he had chosen to embrace. When Maya arrived, the gallery was nearly empty, the echo of footsteps and soft classical music the only companions to their tension. Julian turned instantly, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither moved. The weight of everything, the misunderstanding, the fear, the longing, hung heavy between them. "Julian?" Maya whispered. The single word carried relief, hesitation, and hope, all at once. He took a careful step forward. "Maya, please, just let me explain." His voice was quiet but firm, a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Everything you saw yesterday, it was a misunderstanding. I would never, could never betray you, not after what we've shared." Her eyes softened but remained cautious. "I want to believe you," she admitted, her voice shaking, "but I've been hurt before. I
I don't know if I can trust so easily." Julian reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined, the thread around their wrists pulsing almost imperceptibly, guiding them toward each other. "You don't have to trust easily," he said softly. "Just trust me now. Let me show you that this connection, this thread, is real. I'm not going anywhere unless you choose to let me." The words struck something deep within Maya. The fear remained, but it was overshadowed by longing, by the undeniable pull she had felt from the very first encounter. She took a deep breath, letting the vulnerability in her chest bloom into courage. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll listen. I'll try." Julian's face brightened, relief and quiet joy mingling in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, leaning in slightly, careful, patient, giving her space to step closer or pull back. She stepped closer. The space between them shrank, filled with tension, warmth, and the pulse of possibility. Have you ever had to decide between fear and love? Comment below what you would do in Maya's place. They walked slowly through the gallery, sharing words, glances, and subtle touches. Julian explained the misunderstanding, the lunch, the casual gestures misinterpreted in photos, the context Maya had never seen. He spoke with honesty and vulnerability, allowing himself to be fully present, fully open. Maya listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes laughing at the absurdity, sometimes pausing to feel the sincerity in his voice. By the time they reached the balcony where they had first lingered together, a quiet peace had settled over them. The thread pulsed more strongly now, no longer subtle, a heartbeat that matched their own, a bridge spanning fear, doubt, and past pain. Maya finally spoke, voice soft but steady. "I don't know what the future holds, Julian. I don't know if it will be easy, but I don't want to let fear dictate my choices anymore. I want to try, with you." Julian's chest tightened with emotion. "I've never wanted anything more," he said, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll face everything together, every fear, every doubt, every joy, together." If you were watching this moment, would you cheer for them to take the leap, or worry it's too soon? Comment your thoughts. The space between them dissolved. Julian leaned in and Maya met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, but it carried all the weight of their journey. The misunderstandings, the vulnerability, the laughter, the connection. It was a promise, a choice, a surrender to love that had waited patiently for them to embrace it. Pulling back slightly, Maya rested her forehead against his. Julian smiled, voice low and tender. "I feel the same, safe, seen, and connected. The thread, it's more than a symbol, it's a promise." They lingered there, arms wrapped around each other, letting the moment stretch, savoring it, allowing their hearts to heal just enough to embrace the love they had fought to acknowledge. Do you think they've truly overcome their fears, or is this just the beginning of a deeper journey? Comment your prediction for the final resolution. That night, the thread pulsed quietly, a tether now strengthened by choice, courage, and shared vulnerability. Both Maya and Julian knew that their connection was no longer fragile. It had survived its first real test. And the city, once cold and indifferent, seemed to hum with their triumph, reflecting the start of a love that had been waiting patiently for them to choose it.
The morning sun spilled across the city, golden and warm, cutting through the remnants of last night's rain. The streets gleamed, and the air carried a crisp freshness,
as if the world itself had shifted in anticipation of something new. Maya stood at her apartment window, the red thread still wrapped around her wrist, now pulsing faintly but steadily, a heartbeat of continuity, connection, and promise. Julian arrived a little later, knocking softly at her door. She opened it without hesitation this time, the hesitation of yesterday gone. In his eyes she saw relief, tenderness, and the echo of every moment they had shared, the laughter, the misunderstandings, the fear, and the courage that had brought them here. "I wasn't sure I'd see you this morning," Julian said, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But I had to. There's nowhere else I'd rather be than here with you." Maya stepped aside, letting him in. "I've been thinking. About everything," she admitted. "About the thread, about us, about fear. I realized something. Love isn't about avoiding risk. It's about choosing someone even when it scares you." Julian reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally, as if the thread itself guided them together. "Then we choose each other," he said simply. "Every day, despite everything, together." They moved to the small balcony, the city sprawling beneath them, alive and endless. The thread pulsed warmly, a reminder that their bond was no longer fragile, no longer a tenuous connection. It was deliberate, chosen, and cherished. Julian wrapped an arm around Maya's shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the unspoken promises it carried. The memory of the gallery, the cafe, the laughter, and even the misunderstanding hung lightly in the air. Each moment had been a step, a lesson, a test, but now it all coalesced into clarity. Their journey through fear, vulnerability, and choice had led them here, to a space where love was not a gamble, but a certainty born of courage and connection. Have you ever had a connection that felt destined? Comment below and share your story of love that overcame obstacles. Julian leaned back slightly, cupping Maya's face with both hands. "Do you remember the first time we met, the red thread?" Maya smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I do. I thought it was just a silly superstition back then, but now I see it wasn't. It brought us here." "It did," Julian agreed, voice low. "Not just to the same place, but to each other. Every tug, every pull, it was guiding us toward this moment. And I wouldn't change a thing, not the laughter, not the misunderstandings, not the fear and the courage that had led us here." Maya's lips curved into a gentle, genuine smile. I think I've finally learned what trusting feels like, and it's you. It's always been you." Julian's smile deepened, and he bent to press his lips to hers in a kiss that was tender, lingering, and full of promise. It was not the tentative, uncertain touch of early connection. It was assured, steady, and celebratory, the culmination of every choice, every risk, every moment that had drawn them together. The thread hummed faintly, almost audibly, as if affirming the bond it had patiently nurtured. The city outside bustled with life, indifferent to the quiet triumph unfolding on the balcony. But for Maya and Julian, time had slowed, stretching to accommodate their joy, their relief, and their newfound certainty. The distance of past misunderstandings, the ache of fear, and the scars of old wounds were all present but softened, woven into the fabric of a love that was resilient and real. They pulled back just slightly, foreheads touching, breathing in sync. This feels like home," Maya whispered. Julian nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Home is wherever we are together. I don't need anything else, not fortune, not fame, not certainty about anything else. Just you. And the thread will remind us that no matter what, we're tied together, even when we can't see it." What do you think the red thread truly represents in their story? Fate, love, or courage? Comment on your interpretation. They spent the rest of the morning walking through the quiet streets, hand in hand, laughter spilling freely as they revisited small moments from their past encounters. Each glance, each touch, each shared smile reinforced the depth of their connection. The thread on Maya's wrist seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a quiet, constant affirmation that this love was real, deliberate, and enduring. As the sun climbed higher, Julian paused in a small park, turning to face her fully. No matter what comes next, Maya, we face it together. We've seen how fragile things can be, but we've also seen how strong we are when we choose to trust, to be vulnerable, to love. Maya's eyes softened, glistening with happiness and certainty. Together, she echoed. Always together. They kissed again, a kiss that sealed their promises, their courage, and their love. The red thread, invisible but unwavering, hummed quietly against their wrists, a symbol of the journey they had survived and the bond they had chosen to protect. Do you believe some connections are meant to last forever? Comment your thoughts before the story ends. As they walked away, side by side, the city around them seemed brighter, more alive. The rain-soaked streets reflected the sunlight like scattered jewels, and every step they took together felt like a celebration of choice, courage, and love. Their story had reached its emotional climax, the thread of fate now intertwined with their deliberate decision to embrace happiness. For Maya and Julian, the journey was not just about romance. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to choose love despite fear. And as the thread pulsed quietly, reminding them of the path that had led them here, it promised that no matter what challenges awaited, they would face them together, bound by more than chance, a love that had been tested, chosen, and won. What lessons did you take from Maya and Julian's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could help someone else see the power of trust, courage, and love. If stories like this move you, be sure to follow our channel for more emotional, heart-touching journeys that remind us why taking a chance on love can change everything.
Thank you so much for watching Maya and Julian's story all the way to the end. I hope it inspired your heart as much as it did theirs. We have many more incredible stories waiting for you, so go ahead and click the video on your screen to discover the next unforgettable tale. You won't want to miss it.